last two column just some cars that they potentially own and different models. Just some generic information that we're going to play around with. So this is something we could have if we were looking at our data for students and information about them and where they're from. I also have a secondary file of courses that we're teaching, an instructor type, or sorry, an instructor name, and then the location that they're at. And I'm going to show you how we can pull those together here as well. Because we could have information where we want to know, for a specific student, where are they taking their course at, who's their instructor, and in this case, this file doesn't have all that information, so we're going to pull it all together. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to explain a little bit. This is an Excel file. There are multiple different types of Excel files. The most common is an XLSX, XLSB, those kind of things. It's the standard format for Excel files. You can save them. When you have a file like that, you can have multiple tabs on the file, and you can do all sorts of formatting, sorting, etc. Occasionally, particularly when we're working with data from Jinzabar will kick out the file in what's called a CSV file, comma separated value. It's a very, very basic file, and it does not save all of that other information. It only contains one tab. It doesn't do any of the formatting, things like that. So if you're ever working with an Excel file, make sure that you're saving it as a XLS, XLSBX, XLSX. If you have questions about that, anytime throughout this session or in the future, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions on those things. Next thing I'm going to talk about, in Excel, we have different tabs, and we're going to focus on a couple of them throughout today. So if you hear me talking about tabs, it's either the tabs up at the top, I'll say tabs at the top, or tabs at the bottom. So tabs at the bottom is where your data is located on the sheets. Tabs at the top, I'm going to be typically talking about Home tab, which is where you're going to do probably 90% of your things. This is the standard one you're used to, where you do a lot of your formatting. Real quickly, the other one I'm going to talk about is Insert, where you can do some pivot tables. You can insert charts if you wanted to. And then the other one is the Data tab, where as we get into it, we'll talk more about them. But if I'm talking about tabs at the top, it's these tabs up here. Tabs at the bottom is the sheets with the information on there. The first thing we're going to talk about is filtering. So a lot of times if you're looking at this sheet of information, you want to do a quick search in there and to see who, like as an example, let's say we want to see all the students that are in gymnastics. You can do that, you can say it's gymnastics here, find them one at a time, but there is an option called filtering, which allows us to take this entire list and sort it and filter down to just those students that are in gymnastics. So the way you do a filter is you click on the top row, which has what's called the header row, and it contains describes what's in the rows below. So we're going to click on that entire row. We just click on the one over here, and on the Home tab, there's a button to the far right called Sort and Filter. And when you click on that, it gives you some options. We are looking for the filter option, and when you click on filter, it now has applied that filtering option to each of the columns where you have data. And so as an example, we talked about sports. I can now click on the drop down next to the sport option, and it shows me all of the different sports that are listed in that column. You can uncheck the ones you want. You can click on the select all, and it'll select them all. If you click it again and unselect them. In my example, we talked about wanting to find just those students that were in gymnastics. So I've clicked on select all to uncheck everything. And then I click on gymnastics, so it's only one selected. And now I can see when I click enter, I click OK at the bottom, that these are the only students in my example document that are in the gymnastics sport. One quick thing to see is once you've done a filter, at the very bottom left, you will see a thing down here, and it'll say 16 or a different number of 200 records found. It's a quick way to see that 200 is the total number of records that were in this example file. 16 is the number of students that have gymnastics as their sport. So if you wanted a quick answer of how many people are doing gymnastics, I can just look down there and say it's 16 rather than trying to go 1, 2, 3, 4 and counting on down the row. So that's a good tip to know as you're working with that. Another thing, you can do multiple filtering in a row. So we've already selected our gymnastics students, but maybe we wanted to see how many gymnastics students were from California. So again, I clicked on the select all to uncheck it and then selected California. And now I can see that there are 5 students that are in gymnastics as their sport and that also live in California. If we wanted to see how many of them were from multiple states, we could select a couple of other options in there and it adds them into that same filter. So you can add filters, you can do multiple columns that you're filtering, or you can do 1 or 2 at a time. Just there's multiple options in there. Once you're done, you can always come and clear filters from each of the columns. If you have multiple columns that you have filters on and you want to just get back to everything being unfiltered, on the Home tab at the top, come back over here to Sort and Filter. There's an option for clearing the filters, and it removes all the filters as you go. So the next thing we're going to talk about is sorting. Right now, these are the data in here is not in any particular order. We have Sebastian Lewis at the first. We have Isabel Thomas. You know, they're not in alphabetical order. The courses aren't the thing. Let's just say we wanted to put these students in alphabetical order. The easiest way to do that is you click on, so I'm going to step back one step. I kind of talked about this. Each of these are considered rows, and these are the columns. You can highlight the rows and columns as you go, but if you want to select your entire spreadsheet, you can click on this kind of little area above the rows and to the left of the columns, and when you click on that, it selects the entire sheet. It allows you to then go through and apply whatever you're going to do. It applies to the whole sheet. In this case, if we wanted to sort it, again, I'm on my Home tab at the top. I go over to Sort and Filter, and I go to Custom Sort. When I click on that, in this case, we do have header rows, so I'm going to make sure that this box is checked. And what that does is it allows me to see the header for each of those rows. And we said that we wanted to sort, if we wanted to sort this, all this data by their name, we could click on name, cell values is correct, and we're going to do an alphabetical, so we're going to go to A to Z. And when I click OK, now you can see that they are in alphabetical order. Now, the one issue we have with this in this data, we have it first name, last name, all in one spot, and the first name is the beginning. So we're actually sorting it by their first name. That could potentially be a problem. We probably want to sort it by their last name to get it in a better alphabetical format. So I'm going to do an undo up here at the top, and I went back there, but I want to now split this name column apart so that I have a first name and I have a last name. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click on column B and I'm going to do an insert. What that does is it gives me a spot to split this column A into 2 different columns of data. So once I have that new row added, I highlight column A, and at the top I go to my Data tab. And on the Data tab, there's an option for Text to Columns. When I click on Text to Columns, it gives me the option. It gives me some parameters to follow. It's going to say, in this, we're selected column A, so our name. It's going to say, how do you want to split the data up in this column? Your 2 options are delimited and fixed width. Fixed width would work in a situation where how you're splitting it, every single piece of data has the same number of characters or spaces that you want to do that split at. In this case, because each person's first name could be different lengths, we don't want to use fixed width. If we said 7 and we look at Zoe's name, it's going to have an issue versus looking at Sebastian. So we're going to stick with delimited. So it's already selected by default. We're going to click on next. In this situation, the character that we want to look at, that we're going to, the delimiter, we're going to use the space. And I'm going to uncheck tab. And what you can kind of see an example here, it looks at the first several rows. And now you can see that it's showing that Sebastian Lewis will be split based on that space between Sebastian and Lewis. And I can click on, the other thing up here, treat consecutive delimiters as one. If you had multiple spaces in there, and this, it would say that 2 spaces is the same as 1 space. So we click on next. And if you wanted to do some formatting on it, you could. For the most part, you're probably just going to click on finish and next and continue on through these. But you could say if you were splitting up a number, you'd have the option to say that it's a date or it's currency, some other things like that. In this case, we're going to leave it as general. And we're going to go on and click on finish. And now you can see that it took the name that was only in column A has now been split. And so now we really have first name and we have last name, which would allow us then to do a better way of going and doing an alphabetical sort. So again, to come back to that sort, I'm going to click on this spot here above the rows to the left of the columns, highlight everything and go back to my home tab. And I go over here to sort and filter. The far right, I do custom sort. Again, I make sure that my data has header boxes checked. And I'm going to say I want to sort it by last name, A to Z. And in this situation where maybe we have 2 Johnsons or 2 Thompsons or something like that, I'm going to say after they sort it by their last name, then I want to sort it by their first name. And when I click OK, now I can see that in this case Anderson, we had multiple Andersons because I also said I wanted to sort it by the first name. Ava is before Benjamin, before Charlotte, etc. Okay, so we've kind of talked about that. The next thing the next formula I'm going to talk about is pulling pieces of information out of a string of text. So let's take a look at this course column. This is the full course, so Ava Anderson is in Bio 150 with a section of 380. If I wanted to get information on the students that are in a biology class, I can do a sort on column C and get them in order, but it also is going to kind of lump them together and it wouldn't be ordered. But if I want to have it as a new piece of information, I'm going to take that bio and I'm going to put it into a new column. So the way I do that is I right click on column D because I want it to be right next to the course. So I right click on column D, I do insert. I'm going to call this the department. And I'm going to put a formula in that is going to grab that piece of information from the course column and put it into this new column in column D. So anytime you're doing a formula, you start off with an equal sign. As I start typing my formula, the Excel program will kind of recognize what I'm potentially looking for. And in this case, I know that my department is always the first 3 characters of the course column. And since it's always the first 3, it's always at the left side, I'm going to use a formula called left, which returns the specific number of characters from the start of a string of text. So once I have left typed in there, I can hit tab, which would then automatically put that into the right thing. And you can see that it now has the parentheses in there that I'm going to need. As you are filling out formulas and you start it, so I said left, it's going to kind of prompt you for the pieces of information that you need to finish your formula. In this case, it's asking for the text that I want to grab the piece of information from, those characters. So I'm going to click on C2 because that's where it is. I put a comma in and then it's asking number of characters and I want the first 3 characters from the left. And if I put another parentheses and hit enter, now I have that Ava Anderson, this class is in the bio department. I can, because I want it for all of them, I can do it in 2 ways. I can do a Control C, right click and copy, or Control C on my keyboard. And if I do that, I can then click on the next spot and paste it. I can also, if I've clicked on the cell that I have that formula in, you'll see that in the bottom right of that selection, it kind of highlights it in green, there's a square there. And if I click on that, move my mouse over that square, it changes my cursor, and then I can click and drag that all the way down as far as I want. And you can see that it takes that formula and it moves it down a row. It changes, instead of looking at C2 like it was on this one, if I go to my next cell, it's going to be looking at the next cell down. It automatically knows that you want to take that formula, apply it downwards, but also moving that information as you go. So I'm going to do a Control C to copy it. I could scroll all the way down, but one tip I have is if you are in a column or row that has data in there, if you hold Control and you click your down arrow, it'll take you as far down as you can go without any gaps. So I did that, all my data was in there, so it took me just to the very bottom. I'm going to go over one cell because this is where I want to paste it. I'm going to hold Control Shift and the up arrow, and it highlights all of those cells that I'm going to want to paste this into. And I can do a Control V or right click and paste. Some of the paste options is just standard, which is what we're going to do. There are some other options in there if you want to get into that. But now, if I go all the way up, I can see that my department has been filled out. So one other thing that I know that I always want to see as I'm doing this is if I'm down here several rows down, all of a sudden I don't know what my header was on this row. I kind of like to be able to see that header row regardless of how many rows down I have gone. I want to be able to always see that in column D, this is department, this is the last name column. So the easiest way to do that is what is called freeze pane. That regardless of how far you scroll down, you will always see that header row. If I wanted to see multiple other rows, like their first and last name, we can also set it to show that. So when you're wanting to do a freeze pane, what you want to do is you want to consider which rows and columns you want to be viewable. So in this case, I want to for sure see the header row, but I also want to be able to see the first and last name. And so once you've decided that, you want to click on the cell that has whatever rows you want visible above it and whatever columns to the left of it. So in this case, by selecting C2, I will guarantee that I'll get all of row 1 and all of columns A and B. Once I've decided that, I go up here to my tabs at the top. I look for View, and on the View tab, over kind of towards the right middle, there's a Freeze Panes. I'm going to click on that. The Freeze Panes option at the top, which is the one that does by default, says that the rows and columns visible, like we're saying. So if I click on that, now no matter how far I scroll, my top row is there, and no matter how far I go over to the right, my first two columns are always going to be showing up. Okay. Take a look at my notes real quick, see where we're at. One other thing we're going to take a look at, a tip and trick. If we had, as we were working through this, we had several columns that we aren't able to see everything in there. So in this case, E, it's our street address, this is our city and state, but I can't really see Houston because it's so narrow that the next cell, Texas, is overriding it. The easiest way to do it that I have found is you can always click on column F and I can drag it to the side, and now I can see everything. But if I'm looking down here, let's just say I only saw the first and I did to Houston, Kansas City still, because it's so long, isn't showing up. I can always click on column F at the top, and you'll notice that if I put my mouse between columns F and G, it kind of gives me the option to click and drag. But if I double click, it automatically sizes it so that everything in that column shows up. I don't have to go through and try to make sure it fits. Just by double clicking, the system automatically decides that it needs to be, 2 inches wide, and you can see everything in there. I could do that for multiple columns, but I find the easiest way to do it is, again, over here where I want to select the entire sheet. I go to that little box above the rows to the left of the columns. Then I choose any of the gaps between any two columns, and I double click, and it automatically sizes every column to the correct width so that you can see everything in it. And it takes into consideration what is at the very top for the header, along with each specific row. So that is a pretty handy tip. If you are having issues with rows where you have it set so that you can have wider rows, similar to auto sizing the columns, you can auto size it on the rows as well. Most of the time you're not going to probably run into the issue. The biggest place is auto sizing the columns. Okay. So we have this for this data, and let's just say we're looking at Ava. If you're looking at this, you might want to know that you can see that she's in biology 150, 380, but you might want to know who the instructor is. Sometimes that information is not going to be on one sheet of information, one sheet. We might also have this list over here as an example that we have all our courses listed, and we show an instructor, and we also show where the location is. So one thing I like to do is I want that information in one sheet. I want to see that Ava is in bio, she lives here, but also I want to know that her instructor for that course is, let's just say, John Brown, and that course is being taught on main campus. So the easiest way I know to do that is I want those two pieces of information. So I'm going to highlight E and F. I'm going to highlight two columns. I'm going to right click and insert. And I'm going to say that this is going to be the instructor column, and this will be the location column. So the easiest way to do it, you'll hear, if you've dealt with me before, you've heard me talk about VLOOKUP. And VLOOKUP, what it does, so I start typing in VLOOKUP, it gives it, and I hit tab to finish filling it out. Basically what it does is it takes a piece of information, in this case the course number, it then goes and looks at a different area and finds that course, and then finds a related piece of information. So what it's going to say is, what piece of information do I want to look up? What piece of information am I looking for related information from? So I click on this course because I want that Bio 150. I want to know who the instructor is. Do a comma. It asks for the table array, which is essentially saying where is that piece of information in the related information found. So I click over on this other tab I have. I'm going to say, here's my course and here's my instructor. So I highlight those and then I drag it all the way down because, we talked about bio. Bio is not at the beginning, so I have to highlight the entire thing. So that's the array, the range that I'm looking for. I do a comma. The next thing it asks for is, of that range, that array you just found, where is the related piece of information found? It always knows that we're matching off of the first column, but where, if I had multiple columns selected, which column contains the related information we want? So we want the instructor, so I'm going to do a 2. And then I do another comment and it says, do you want an approximate match or do you want the exact match? I almost always will say exact match, so 0. And I hit enter, and now that I can see that Ava Anderson is in bio and her instructor, I just used some examples, bio instructor number 1. But if it was a specific instructor name, it would be there. Again, I'm going to drag this down to paste it down, and you'll see that it starts filling it out. Benjamin Anderson has CIS instructor number 1. Sebastian Clark has, for his philosophy, his communications instructor number 1. But you will see that Sophia Clark has an hashtag NA. What that means is that it looked for that information and it couldn't find it. And the issue that you'll run into is when you are doing a VLOOKUP, as you pull and paste downwards in Excel, it shifts everything downwards as you go. And so when the first one, it was looking at this range, but on the next one, As I shifted down, it moved everything down one row. And so by the time we got down to row 13, it's now looking at that, and if it's anything above it, it's going to miss it. The easiest way to fix that problem is when I come back in here to this formula, I'm going to put dollar signs around that range, and so no matter how many times I copy and paste it down, it doesn't shift. So I can either put dollar signs by hand in front of both the A, which represents the columns, and 2 representing the rows, or I can just click on that and I hit F4 on my keyboard and it automatically locks it into place. So I'm going to do a Control C now that I've done that, and just so we can see that as I paste those down, now it's keeping that range the same and it has not lost it, and there's no hashtag NAs in there. So I'm going to go again to the bottom. I'm pasting all of those, and I just did Control down to get to the bottom. I went, so Control down, got to the very bottom, moved over one cell, clicked hold Control and Shift on my keyboard and the up arrow to select the entire range, and then I'm pasting that in there. And now I can see for each of the course, for each person, their course and their instructor. Now I'm going to stop briefly. I know it's getting close to 11:30. So Karen, do you want to say anything? I have more, but I'll let you talk for a second.
Yeah, how about if you do need to drop off at 11:30, we understand. But if you have any questions right now that you want to ask Jacob, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll continue on for a little bit more. I think he's going to probably talk about the pivot tables, maybe a couple of other little things. But anybody have any questions before we roll on just a little bit longer? Before anybody does drop off, just thanks Jacob for being here and helping us learn a little bit today. I know I'm already learned a few things that I can pick up, so I appreciate that a lot. Sorry, I forgot I wasn't on camera, so but we'll let him roll on and we'll keep on going.
Yep, I'll cover a little bit of pivot tables and then we will call it good for today. So let me go back in here, sharing my screen again. I'm not going to worry about location. We could do the same thing if we wanted to by finding the instructor. But in this case, I'm not going to worry about it right now. Another thing I use a lot is pivot tables. It's kind of an easy way to do some filtering, but also to see all of the information together. So the easiest way to do that, again, I'm going to select the whole sheet by clicking on that spot above the rows to the left of the columns. I go up here to my Insert tab, and then on the Insert tab, there's Pivot Tables, the very first option. When I click on it, it's going to bring up a little dialog box. I can tell you right now that in the entirety of the time I have used pivot tables, I have never changed the default options. So when you do this, just click OK. It creates a new sheet with some information on there. And move this out of the way. It gives me some options. So basically what it's going to allow me to do is kind of create a quick table that contains information and does some counting or some filtering if we wanted to. So on our Excel sheet, we have now seen that Ava is in this class in biology. And her instructor is bio instructor 1. If we wanted to know how many students were for each instructor, this is where a pivot table is going to come in. So I've created the pivot table, and I want to know that for each instructor, so I put that for my rows, how many students are they teaching? In this case, the quickest way to do it is I have to find something that I can count. And so I'm going to use first name. It doesn't really matter what I'm using. I'm just saying, for each instructor, it's going to count the number of first names that were in there. It's just an easy way. There's other options you can do, but I typically just grab a name because it's not a number. And now I can see that for each instructor, for ag instructor, let me make this a little bit bigger. I went to a new tab and made it smaller. You can see that ag instructor 1 has 8 students, ag instructor 2 has 12, and so on. So it's a quick and easy way to see that. And I'm using this example, but regardless of what data you have, you can have these same options as you're going through it. You can take a column, and do some counts for those. Another thing is once I've done this, I can kind of switch things in and out. I could add another pivot table if I want, but if I just wanted to go back to default, I would just drag things out of there. Let's just say maybe we want to see the number of students from each state. So I find the state and I put it into the rows column. Again, I'm going to grab first name just as a way to count. And I can quickly see that I have 15 students that live in Arizona, 39 in California, 12 Colorado, so on. If I wanted to also see the cities that they lived in, I can do multiple levels, multiple layers in my pivot table. So I'm going to grab city over here. I'm going to drag it down to rows. I'm going to put it under the state, and I'll show you why I do that. So now you can see that Arizona has 15 total. 15 of them live in Phoenix. But if I look at California, my 39, I had 3 cities that make up the students that live in California. So I can see that Los Angeles has 9, San Diego has 18, San Jose 12, and altogether that adds up to the 39. You'll note I did say that I wanted to put city under state, and if I don't, if I put city at the top, it doesn't look as nice because then each city has one state associated with it, and I can see that Austin lives in Texas, and so it's really not showing me the information I want. By putting city under state, it's going to show me a better breakdown. This is really just this is a read-only function of Excel. It's not changing anything on my main sheet, so I can play around with how I sort and put things into the columns and the rows, and it's not going to change my original data. One other thing, if I wanted to also see the number, I'm going to remove the city just to make it a little bit cleaner to see. Let's say I was curious to see the number of students from each state and the department that they were in. So we created that department column, and I'm going to drag that to the columns. And now, this isn't probably something we would actually use in our day-to-day, but it's just kind of an example I'm using. I can see that in Arizona, we had 2 students that were in an ag class, 1 in an art class, and so on. So I can add rows and columns and kind of get some information. There's just different things that I want to do. If I wanted, one thing that could be handy to know is maybe we want to know what the average age of a student is from California. We have age in there, and so I'm going to drag age into the values. By default, a lot of times when I'm putting in a number-based item, it defaults to sum, but I can always change it. So I'm going to go to I click on the little drop down next to what's in the value, where it says sum of age. I'm going to click on that. I go to value field settings, and I want to say, instead of the sum, I want the average. And now I can see that the average age of a student from Arizona is a little over 21. California is roughly 20 and a half, and so on. Illinois had an average of 19, and so on. So there's a lot of different things you can do with pivot tables. I think I'll probably call it good at that. I can go a lot deeper, and I might do another session at some point for more of an intermediate training. But hopefully this has been helpful for everybody. Got a little bit of information in there, some tips and tricks on how to use Excel, some of the things that you can do with it. And again, if at any point you have questions in the future, feel free to reach out to me, catch me in the hall, email me. I'm glad to work with you one-on-one if you have questions.
Yeah, thanks so much. I know I picked a few things up, but does anybody have any questions before we adjourn and let Jacob go on with his day? Okay, not hearing anything. So thanks, Jacob, for being here. Appreciate it. And I'm sure you might have a few people stopping by your office. So.
Glad to help.
Take care. We'll see ya. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jacob.
You're welcome.